ExTrans people who have detransitioned or in the process of doing so. Why? I began to socially transition at 14 years old. It was 2006. And I had spent the previous 3 years swearing I was a boy and doing my damnedest to act/talk/look like a boy. I didn't know what trans was or that it existed. I just knew I wanted to not be a girl. I wanted to be a boy because it brought me so much comfort and joy to be seen as male. I met a trans man in 2007 named E. He was 10 years older than me and had medically transitioned. He took me under his wing and I began to secretly look towards medical transition. I mostly hated my breasts. I wanted them gone. I wanted a flat chest that didn't interfere with my clothes and my happiness. Fast forward to 2017. I'm still socially out as male, but haven't started hormones because of money, homelessness, and the back of my mind feeling that it wouldn't bring me happiness. I still longed for a complete mastectomy, but had no means of achieving it without fully sinking financially/losing my job to recover. No support system. I realized through therapy in 2018 to 2020 that my transition goals had all started at 12 years old because kids picked on me for being an ugly girl. So I thought maybe they wouldn't pick on me as a boy. People still picked on me. I wasn't happy. I'm 30 now and don't really even think about gender on a daily basis. I just exist and look for happiness where I can find it. I was a trans man from about 19 years old. I socially transitioned and took hormones for the 4 to 6 year period that I was trans. I originally transitioned due to being a GNC kid, presented very masculinely, because I thought that being GNC/masculine and same-sex attracted meant I was trans, due to adults around me talking to me about gender and the possibility I might be trans. 13 at the time of that, I detransitioned because I realized that I didn't legitimately want to be male. I wanted to be able to be masculine. I definitely had social dysphoria and still do. It was the physical part one was confused about. I don't regret all of my transition and appreciate some of the masculinizing effects of the testosterone from when I was on it. I also know that my transition helped me to be able to be masculine/be me. Beforehand I was always pressured to wear a dress, bra, etc. When I transitioned, I was given the freedom to just be me and not have to conform to femininity, which caused me, and still does, great distress. Being trans and my consequent detransition helped me become who I'm today. I did legally and medically detransition, but refused to change how I dress/am. Before my transition I had for a short period of time identified as butch lesbian. Now I decided that probably is the correct label to describe me. Even masculine woman too, but I only see them as a way to describe how I present/act/see myself. I don't let them define me as a person. A part of me, but not the whole of me. Overall, I think my transition and detransition was a big period of growth. I still deal with a lot of dysphoria, but I'm managing it my own way, like lessening it by dressing in men's clothing vs women's, which does help. I see myself as a woman due to my sex, but as a masculine woman, I think there out to be more representation of just plain masculine woman. Something I didn't have when I was young. TW, sexual abuse. Not personally trans, but in working as a counselor. 1 or 2 trans people I've worked with that had felt less certain of themselves after or while transitioning, as well as a much larger handful of people who were taking baby steps to transition in the first place, had starting experiences that were kinda half and half. So like around 50% generally just not feeling like they fit their gender or assigned sex at birth, while the other 50% somewhat presented as trying to run away from or reject their own bodies and gender identity as a result of trauma. So not that they didn't feel like they fit their gender anymore, but feeling like they wanted to get far away from what that gender meant to them. In these latter cases, these were, sadly, mostly biologically female people that resented their gendered bodies so much as being a factor that allowed or led to them being sexually assaulted or raped, including cases of childhood abuse, i.e. hating themselves for having breasts, hating themselves for not being able to not be seen as female or be perceived in a non-societally sexualized lens or perspective by outsiders, getting catcalled or harassed or ogled by people on the street, etc. Unfortunately, within these specific cases and examples, these people targeting their experiences of gendered violence and avoiding their initial/previous gender as a result of this did not fix the underlying trauma. It didn't reduce their fear or self-hatred or need for self-forgiveness after being victimized, but also, like, living in a society that treats women like sexualized commodities that people are entitled to also does not help the situation. It's really hard. Let's say that your house gets burglarized in a really traumatizing way. A lot of people are going to want to move to a new house. But in this case, you can't. You're stuck in this house, where you've had such painful experiences, and the house itself being associated with that scares you. The house didn't do anything wrong. And there's nothing bad about the house itself. It's actually a really great house. It's a complicated process of figuring out how to make our house a home again, and to live within ourselves. Focusing on making improvements is almost counterintuitive to the fear response that's happening in these cases. But hey, maybe we go room to room and start working on loving our house again, making it something less scary and something we don't need to run away from. Maybe we buy a couple of happy little plants. Maybe we repaint the walls. Add some art that makes us happy when we look at it. At the same time, though, it's hard because we don't want other people to see this too much and to think of breaking in again because of our house being so nice. And honestly, maybe we just don't want anyone to ever look at or acknowledge a house in the first place. And we wish that more people would mind their own business. But also, our house being a nice house isn't what led to it getting broken into in the first place. It wasn't our house's fault. It was the fault of the criminal who decided to be a piece of shit and destroy someone's ability to feel safe. No house ever deserves to be broken into or invaded, regardless of how lovely it is. Even if the doors and windows are unlocked or are left wide open. Maybe we forgive our house for the bad moments that have happened within its walls. And we learn to see it as guiltless, faultless, innocent. It is a simple, neutral container for everything that exists within it. And no negative judgment needs to come with that. One of the biggest things I've learned as a counselor is how seriously hard it is for people to be gentle with themselves. It's hard for me too, obviously. The above scenario is not the case for all trans people. And even if it was, trauma doesn't invalidate any of our needs or wants to do things. Nor does it make our experiences or reasonings for pursuing transitions as any less valid or less genuine than anyone else's. My thoughts here are just clips of moments from witnessing people's lives and seeing them benefit from looking inwards at their gender and their thoughts related to their gender identity. Wanting to help them feel safer within their bodies, regardless of how that outwardly presents. For the record, I don't want any of this to come across as if trans people process their past trauma. They'll learn to accept their gender and stop trying to be someone else. Because that's not the message here. It's Marizo about flexibility, building resilience, building self-forgiveness and acceptance/allowance, understanding our personal needs while granting ourselves permissions to exist beyond labels or judgments or boxes or categories if/as necessary, while also assessing what we want all of these categories to mean to us in the first place. Sorry for writing a book. I lived as a trans man, female to male, for about 5 years. I never started hormones. But I had fully socially transitioned, so the shift back was very significant and very awkward. I have a couple mental health diagnoses that I think, if they'd been addressed sooner, I wouldn't have felt like I had a hole in my soul I was desperate to fill. It was my error to force a band-aid solution over the problem. But the real issue was that the adults around me ignored my mental health up to that point. Not that they let me transition socially. Even medically, had I chosen to do so. I feel strongly that had I been met with more resistance, I would have dug my heels in and may have never realized that I wasn't trans. Edit. To clarify, I mean that had there been more pushback, I would have not realized the truth and would have stayed trans. It was validation that made me eventually realize I was wrong and detransition, not resistance. I don't regret that period of my life. I learned a lot about myself and who I'm not. I had just entered college at the time. And I'm really grateful I had the opportunity to figure this out in an environment where most people accepted me either way. There was a lot of pressure not to detransition. But it was almost exclusively from non-trans people trying to be accepting and dissuade what they thought were minor demons. It's important to me that when I share this part of my personal history that it isn't weaponized against actual trans people. They welcomed me into their community and were kind to me when I realized it was not the right place for me. I legitimately owe my life to the kindness and goodwill of the trans community. Edit, spelling. Edit again. A few points that I want to clarify. 1. The mental health crisis I refer to happened when I was a child. 2. Support for being trans was the thing that helped me grow comfortable to realize I was not the pushback when I was yelled, slared at and ridiculed. That did not make me examine my current situation and try to understand myself better. 3. This is all exclusive my personal experience. I'm happy to answer any questions. But I'm not trans. And to understand trans people and the trans community you should talk them, not me. It's very complex, but the biggest factor why I started transitioning in the first place is that heteronormativity was forced on me so aggressively as a kid that I genuinely believed the only way I could fit into society was as a woman. As a man I was too soft, bad, empathetic, bad, and gay, very bad. Because of my soft face and voice I also didn't need to change anything except grow out my hair to perfectly pass as a girl, so transitioning seemed like destiny to me. Started transitioning as soon as I left high school. After a year I started taking hormones and the body changes weirded me the F out. I was unsure of my decision and that gave me anxiety attacks every day. I paused the transition for a bit and then decided to give living as a man one last shot. But this time as my own version of a man, and according to my own beliefs instead of what I've been taught by society. It worked and never looked back. That was a decade ago. Edit. One thing I would add is that even though I detransitioned rather quickly, I don't regret trying. If I hadn't tried it, it would have always been a big what if question in my life and I learned a lot from it. Thank you for all the wonderful messages. I read them all and they made me so happy. I slowly realized that gender was not the actual root of the problem I was dealing with. Gender dysphoria was more of a symptom than the problem. And accepting and loving my body as it is would be easier and healthier than trying to chase after a superficial fix. The real problem was a complicated mess of deep self-loathing, identity problems, and gender biases. Self-love is one of those things that pops up on Instagram as a sort of dismissive heal all along with take a bath, drink more water, and do yoga. But it's really a lot more important than it seems. Couple that with deep-seated perception biases of the sexes, which we all have, and a transient sense of self, and you have a recipe for gender dysphoria. It took decades to unravel some of this stuff. It wasn't at all just like an aha moment, but a slow unwinding through years of hard work. A lot of false starts and realizations that turned out to fizzle, or require years of additional insight to really become anything. Even with a lot of work, these things don't just up and go away. I've been able to change my relationship with myself, and I'm finding more and more ways to love myself, but my perceptions of gender are still heavily biased. I still relate and identify more with the opposite sex than with my own. As of right now, I would say there still is a disconnect between the gender of my innermost self-image and my body, but I've stopped seeing that as a problem. I've started to question whether this matters. And whether having a gender identity is even healthy for me. My body is what it is, and my mind is what it is. And I'm working on loving and accepting myself exactly as I am. As of so far, this feels healthy, freeing, and authentic. I came out in 2018. Trans MTF. I was a really depressed 20-year-old. I had always thought I might be trans. I never felt right in myself since around age 10. I thought coming out and living as a woman would be my cure. So I came out, and for the first 12 months it did. I was happy, and I felt less insecure. But after that I went back to feeling depressed, suicidal. Antidepressants didn't really help me. Therapy was kinda okay, but it felt like a hole was still there. I ignored it. Once I'm on hormones I'll feel better. 3 years went by. I was on a wait list to get hormones. In the meantime I started gender therapy. My therapist was great. He helped me with confidence and presenting myself, but I still felt wrong and depressed and fucked up in a way I couldn't explain. He found me a job. 6-month paid contract in a charity shop. 25h a week. I was very reluctant fucking charity shop. Old people shit, but he pushed me to go for it so I did. I needed money. Job as a job. For the job I still was presenting a CI's mail. After the interview for the job I was beaming. They were kind and understanding and everything I didn't expect. I started 2 weeks later. A week after working there it started to hit. My mood and overall depression and anxiety was going down. I looked forward to going in every day. A month in. I felt different. I could talk to people and make eye contact. Helping customers. Having banter with the manager and volunteers. After 2 months I just knew. I felt where I belong. I didn't feel trans. My dysphoria went away. I was happy being seen as a male. My depression had mostly disappeared. I haven't thought about killing myself. I'm currently on to my 4th month of working there, and I'm happy as a male. I told my family and friends, and they understand. I'm glad I didn't start hormones or do anything permanent. I'm just glad to be happy again. I love charity shops, and I've found what I want to do long term. I've got THR chance to manage a new store that's opening, and I'm going to grab it with both hands. Not only so I can help the charity, but help the community. I'm still B. And I'm still a LGBTQ+ ally. Trans rights are human rights, and we should do what we can to get trans people whatever they need to succeed. From hormones to therapy. To surgery and safe spaces for them to express themselves without being worried about being hurt. Thanks for reading my dyslexic ass shit. Okay, so I was SEED when I was around 10 years old. So in my mind I thought that if I were a boy, it wouldn't have happened, which I know it's not the case. It can happen to anyone, but I was just a child. Fast forward to 13 years old me, I was sure I was a trans boy. 100%. I came out, and for 3 years I lived as Cole. I didn't start hormones, but I had socially transitioned. There were times when I was doubting myself. I wasn't so sure, but I couldn't understand why. The sad part happened again around 16 and it hit me. So I went to my therapist and just told her everything. I spoke to my family and friends. Now I'm almost 19 years old and still healing. I hate when people still call me Cole. But hey, I can't do much about it. I started transitioning when I was 14, and it was a quick and content process, but I was going through a lot mentally. From 14 to 18 no one could convince me I wasn't a man, or that I shouldn't continue my transition. I started testosterone at 18, but less than a year into it, I started having doubts and stopped. I'm 19 now, and I've been experimenting with more feminine things. I stopped binding, and bought a wig and a skirt and some makeup, and changed my name to something more gender neutral, and I have no idea why. My doubts are more around the fact that I came out during a time where my mother had just kicked me out for dating a trans man, and I was in a really abusive predator relationship with a 22Y/0 at 14, and he was telling me I was a man, and that I was doing the right thing, which caused me to make my whole life and personality completely masculine, and from that time until 18. I was just floating with it, and now that I live on my own and have my shit semi together, I have doubts that I never gave myself a chance to embrace feminine aspects of myself from the beginning of puberty to the near end. So I guess my detransition is a reset to the gender crisis to make sure. Transitioned at 45 in 2008. Knew in a year or thereabouts I had made a mistake. But by then everyone knew the new name, pronouns. And I had 2 surgery and a full beard. I figured I was stuck. I also had heard laser hair removal was out of my financial range and painful. I went off male hormones and on estrogen, complete just so long done, 6 months ago. Tried laser. It was not expensive but was excruciating. It is mostly done on face. and I figure I will have to shave forever. Looking back, I grew up with my mother constantly saying I walked like a man, dressed like one sometimes. I may as well be a man. Tried carrying purse in high school. People actually laughed. Look at Butch here with a purse. I was depressed and alone, and I found a meeting for people thinking about transitioning. Once there, I felt pressured to see it through to be FTM. Never really happy that way. It was so easy to get hormones and surgery. I had a fight to get on estrogen, which is just baffling. For me, transitioning was a combination of family and peer pressure and chronic depression. While others need to do it, I never should have. People, be careful what you comment to your kids. It really stuck with me and has taken me literal decades to get over. Also, once off testosterone and on estrogen, my blood pressure and resting pulse dropped out of dangerous range for the first time since I had started tea in 2008. Cheers. Long story short, I realized I didn't need to go all in to be comfortable with myself. Plus, the crippling self-loathing I had over not looking enough like a CI's girl was way worse than my dysphoria was beforehand. In the end, I settled to just do whatever the fuck felt right and decided to slap the non-binary label on myself. Demi boy if you wanna get specific, and call it a day. Would I like to magically be born again as a CI's girl? Yeah. But that's not how the world works. So I picked the option that in my situation led to the best outcome, and I'm now truly happy. Hell, I don't need therapy for my depression anymore, and in just 2 months I'll be off my meds for it, which is something I never imagined possible. While this might not be the best option for most trans people, it was for me. I started HRT to transition from MTF in my mid-30s. I was on it for about 1.5 years. Almost 2. My experience was great. I had a lot of love and support from my friends and family, and I was enjoying all the changes. Then the pandemic happened, and my provider team closed and left the state. I had to leave the state as well and find employment somewhere else. I started a new job, a new healthcare plan, and I had been off of HRT inadvertently for 6 months by the time everything normalized in my life. I started to dream as male again. I realized I wasn't as hormonal and sensitive. When we started working in person again last year, I was presenting as a male again. My new coworkers have only known me this way, and it was admittedly easier than having to explain transitioning a dozen or so different times to different coworkers. Also, my family is still just as supportive. I don't know if I'll retransition or not. Fort MTF here. I took testosterone for 3 years and got a double mastectomy. Changed my name and documents. Basically, I was unable to pass consistently as a CI's man. It was very stressful to sometimes be read as a man and sometimes as a woman. I never knew exactly how to present or introduce myself, and sometimes worried for my safety. Eventually I had to accept that I may never be read as a man. I cold dug deeper into my transition via surgeries to masculinize my face/body, but they'd be costly. I didn't want them personally, and there was no guarantee that I'd pass afterwards anyway. So I decided my best option was to detransition. After, I began to re-explore my gender and started feeling more comfortable in butch womanhood. Looking back, there were some differences between me and other trans men. For example, most of them viewed their assigned sex as something to overcome, or just irrelevant to their identity as men. But I always felt that being female was part of what formed my identity. I had pushed out all of the parts of myself that conflicted with the narrative I had to uphold to be taken seriously as trans man. Detransitioning allowed me to seriously consider and even embrace those parts of myself again. I don't regret my transition. In fact, I think it helped a lot with my dysphoria. And I don't view myself as ExTrans. Sounds too similar to ex-gay for comfort. I'm just someone whose transition didn't work out. I'm still pro-trans, though I think that trans communities do need to work on having a more individualized and realistic approach to identity and transition, as well as address detransition more seriously/support detransitioners. Reading this thread, I see 2 things in common with every story: mental health and societal expectations. These are both things that world still does not put enough solutions into. A lot of these peoples could have gone through life without having to start transition, to realize they just had mental issues. The world needs to overcome these obstacles. The number of negative comments based on semantics is crazy. Can't we assume a question is well intentioned these days? If we attack everyone who is uninformed on a topic you are close to, how do you hope to gain support and acceptance? It seems really counterproductive. My little sister began a social transition when she was 16. She cut her hair, went by a different name, wore men's clothing, and began binding. I supported her, but when I realized that she was just as depressed and insecure as before, I had a long conversation with her where I just let her say anything that she was feeling. It turns out, she was struggling with a sexuality crisis and felt understandably uncomfortable with the male gaze femininity that's forced down our throats 24/7. So, she started experimenting with femininity on her own terms and is now extremely happy. I'm extremely happy for her. This doesn't in any way discredit trans people who are comfortable with their decisions. Oh wow. The amount of negative comments on this thread is making me worried for my safety, LMAO. But I'll give you an answer anyways. Thought living as a man would finally give me respect and courage I so desperately wanted in life. I started transitioning when I was 12 and lived as a man until 18. I realized that while I enjoyed being a man, it wasn't really who I was, and I could still be respected and loved as a woman. So I detransitioned. While I'm still not 100% happy with myself, I now realize it's not because I'm trans. I'm just generally insecure and always have been. Edit. I feel like I need to specify that I never medically transitioned due to being a minor. I did however legally change my name, use male bathrooms and changing rooms, wore a binder daily, went to a gender therapist and several doctors planning for hormone treatments. I'm not coming at this from a medical angle, even though that's probably what OP wanted. I'm coming at this from a social angle, and while it's not as damning as changing your mind after you've gone through hormones, it's still a huge change in life. Hope that clears things up a bit. I had a year on hormones. I was in a relationship with her MTF and became convinced that I had a repressed transgender identity like she used to. So that's what I told the psychiatrist. After breaking up several years later, it was pretty clear I was only doing it because I was madly in love and didn't want to feel left out of her friendship groups, which were not that welcoming to cis people. I've never been stereotypical of a female. Always played with dinners as a kid. Masculine interest. Never wear makeup. I had some bad sexual trauma experiences. I got some wires crossed believing that my non-conforming to female stereotypes and my trauma equaled out to be gender dysphoria. But I didn't realize I had trauma was the problem. I went to therapy because I wanted to be sure transitioning was for me. I worked through a lot of stuff, and when I told my therapist yeah I don't identify as a man, the absolute confusion she had. I don't want my personal story to be an example of why trans people don't exist. But it is important not to just self-diagnose and talk to a healthcare professional. And maybe not take advice from the internet. Looking up my symptoms, that's what it was. And the cure was to take testosterone and have surgery. So I just believed that. An ex's dad transitioned while we were dating. And after about 10 months he transitioned back. He said that living as a woman wasn't what he thought it would be.